Good morning, everyone. I'm Pierre Tardieu, Chief Policy Officer at WindEurope. I'd like to welcome you all to this resource calling webinar, where we'll be discussing guarantees of origin, market dynamics, regulatory frameworks, and critically the role of guarantees of origin in the development of corporate renewable energy sourcing. So I'm delighted to be here. For those of you who don't know what resource is, it's the Alliance of Corporate Renewable Energy Buyers and Sellers. And the founding organizations are SolarPower Europe, WindEurope, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and RE100. So I'll be calling in a series of experts that you can see on the screen here in a bit. But bear in mind two things, a couple of housekeeping rules. First, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to see this on the resource YouTube channel, as well as on the resource website. And critically for you, we want to keep this discussion as interactive and lively as possible. So you have the options to send in your questions in the GoToWebinar panel that is probably on the right side of your screen. And the team will be going through the questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible and get the experts to share their insights on those. So I'm going to be calling in succession Aurelie Beauvais, Deputy CEO and Policy Director at SolarPower Europe, our colleague Lucy Hunt, Manager for Energy at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and Adam White, Director at REX International. So just to get things kicked off and to set the scene, let's give a quick call to Aurelie. Hi there, Aurelie. How are you?
Hi, good, and you?
Not too bad. How are things in Brussels?
Very good. There's almost sunshine today, so I think we can consider it a good day.
Okay. It's all relative speaking about Brussels, but okay, I'll take you at your word. So fantastic. Aurélie, let's cut right to the chase. So we're doing Geos today on this webinar. Why is this instrument so critical to the development of corporate renewable energy sourcing? Why all the fuss about Geos?
Yes, well, that's a very good question. And indeed, we have made as renewable stakeholders a lot of fuss about Geos, but there is indeed a reason for that. So Geos are a very valuable tool actually to trace, which enables us to trace the renewable electricity that is being supplied to the market. And as such, it becomes also an essential tool for the development of corporate PPAs, because it helps and it enables corporate consumers, but also any type of consumer or an energy supplier, to actually substantiate their claim when they are committing to a consumption target of renewable electricity, or when as a supplier you want, for example, to provide 100% renewable electricity offer. So without a GO today, which is the traceability and accountability instrument that you need to report your claims, you cannot actually, you might be consuming 100% renewable electricity, you will not be able to prove it. So obviously in this context, the GO is really key to boost notably corporate commitments and corporate PPAs. And this is a big market for renewable. So it becomes a very important driver for the growth of renewable installations and to achieve our targets, which we have set for 2030.
Okay, fantastic. So over the past few years, we've been discussing the European regime, and in particular, in 2018, the EU agreed a new directive for renewables, the Renewable Energy Directive, which deals in part with the guarantees of origin. Can you tell us a little bit more about, what the new rule book is about? I mean, what does it change when it comes to guarantees of origin in Europe?
Yeah. So, I mean, indeed, the discussion on the Renewable Energy Directive, and especially the one on the Geos, has been one of the toughest fights on the document per se, so it was quite critical. And one positive development that we've had in the Renewable Energy Directive is really to enshrine the concept of mandatory issuance. So the directive says, as a member state, you must ensure that any renewable electricity that is being generated can be guaranteed with the Geo. So it means that for any project now, which was not necessarily the case in all the member states, you have Geos that are corresponding to every single renewable electricity unit generated, and so that's much better to ensure the growth of the corporate renewable market. There is one caveat to that, unfortunately, which is that despite all our efforts, the conception of mandatory issuance is only partially mandatory, because for projects that are supported, so benefiting from a support scheme, member states are still able, for example, to issue the Geo but cancel it right afterwards. So that's a fairly mandatory issuance as we wish, but that was a very important parameter. And maybe so another positive development was, for example, to remove the explicit mention of auctioning of Geos. So really a stronger framework to prevent unbundled Geos and a bit the savage auctioning of all the Geos that were not used, which was detrimental because it was really breaking the link kind of between the installation and the Geo itself. And maybe the last piece of improvement was to make one step further when it comes to the standardization of Geos. So the Geo market has been in the past maybe more fragmented, but we are in an internal energy market. So we need to strive and move towards more standardized Geo frameworks. And here, notably, the Renewable Energy Directive number 2, which was adopted in December 2018, already singles out, let's say, minimum standards for harmonization, notably regarding to, for example, the size of the installations. So there is a minimum size, which is 1 megawatt-hour. So a Geo can only concern this 1 megawatt-hour unit. You have a standardized validity period. A Geo is valid 12 months and has to be cancelled 6 months after that, and that's the case everywhere. And you also have some requirements when it comes to information. So what type of installation was it? What source is it? Was it supported or not? Where was it located? When did the installation enter into operations? And so obviously all this additional information also enables the corporate consumers to substantiate more claims. For example, they want to consume a Geo in their own market, in their country. And so that was overall very positive.
Okay, excellent. Just maybe a question for clarification for our audience. I mean, when you talk about unbundled Geos, what do you mean exactly?
So when it was the big debate during the discussion on the RED II was really regarding the fact that so those Geos, notably that were linked to supported installations, were cut from their previous installations and auctioned on the market, where actually as an energy supplier, for example, you would only have to buy your Geo on this auctioning market without, for example, having a strong incentive to invest in an additional renewable installation. And the Geos, which are quite cheap today, that meant, I think we did the calculation back in the days, and we found that as a regular, an SME, you could substantiate your claim for renewable electricity for the price of a pack of Smarties, just by buying those very affordable Geos on the market. So the concept of coming back from unbundling Geo is you always keep the link between the Geo and the installation. And if the installation is supported by a support scheme, and as a member state, you really, really don't want to issue the Geo to this installation, then you issue it and you cancel it. And you no longer issue it and put it on an auctioning system.
All right, so sounds like progress, moving towards a little bit more harmonization and a little bit more perhaps granularity than there was before. But is this regime fit for purpose now, or is there still margin for improvement? We know that the Renewable Energy Directive is going to be on the table again next year to adjust it to the climate neutrality objectives that the EU has set for itself now. You know, what are we looking for in terms of improvements on the Geos as part of this new Renewable Energy Directive?
Yeah. So, I mean, indeed, the question is extremely timely because, as you said, we know that a review of the Renewable Energy Directive will come next year already. And well, even though the RED II has done a good job, and we were, I think, all very happy with the result back in December 2018, I think we can definitely improve it for two main reasons. The first one is that well, it's never perfect. We should always try for improvement, and corporate PPAs remains a young market and a young business model. So every year we learn and we improve. And the second thing is that we have at European level a new CO2 target, which is extremely ambitious, of at least 55%. And in terms of renewable energy target, that means we will go from the current target, which is 32% by 2030, to probably at least 37%, if not 40%, looking at the impact assessment of the European Commission. And obviously, if we want to achieve this higher ambition, corporate PPAs are going to be critical to really reach, fill this gap and reach this delta, also with private investment, which is very good. So in this regard, we have worked with the resource platform on a series of proposals of what we think should be part of the future review. And in fact, it goes beyond Geos. There is the notion of Geo, which is very important. And I think the main improvement which we see is the one that you mentioned. We need to keep improving the transparency and the availability of information that we have in Geos, because consumers are looking for even more information today than they were before. Today, you don't want only to know if it's renewable, that's great, and that's the minimum denominator you need, but you also want to be able to value, for example, if you've been using local Geos from your own countries, or if you want to match in a better way the supply and the demand. So, for example, one request is to enable this Geo framework to have, or the Geos to have even more information, for example, with a bit more granularity on the time where the Geo was generated. So that's one thing which we've identified. Another bit for Geos is also maybe to adapt a bit the Geo framework to behind the meter installations and self-consumption installations, because today in some countries you can't receive a Geo for the electricity you self-consume. And so coming back to the issue of traceability and reporting, it's really a pity, because then if as a corporate you're self-consuming in-house, let's say 40% of your electricity consumption, so you're actually supplying 40% of your consumption with renewable electricity, you're not able to claim it, and that's really a pity. But on the other hand, in the RED II, there are bigger problems which have been identified, and the main one is really about removing administrative and regulatory barriers and really making sure that we have a good framework for corporate PPAs. Here we have a very clear article 15.8, which asks member states to lay out explicit provision. And in the national energy and climate plans, only 4 member states have actually developed specific measures or detailed measures to support corporate PPAs. So that's Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, and Spain. And everywhere else, we had nothing. And so obviously here, we think that the Renewable Energy Directive should go one step further to solve this implementation gap. Because once again, corporate PPAs, that's today in 2020, that's 9.4 gigawatts to this point in time. In 2016, it was 2.2 gigawatts. In the next year, it's going to be bigger and bigger. So it's really in the common interest to put in place this advantageous framework. And maybe quickly, some other improvements which we wanted to see, looking at permitting, that's valid for all renewable projects, but that's really a key bottleneck today, which we see to develop renewable projects. And so that means that we as renewable electricity suppliers cannot match the demand because we're too slow. It takes just too much time to put these projects into operations. And the last element which we think really needs to improve is looking at commercial and industrial installations, where we simply have nothing in the RED II, and we think it would deserve a specific framework because the potential could be up to 140 gigawatts of renewable electricity in 2030. So we should not oversee that.
Okay, fantastic for this initial overview. We've started wading into what consumers are looking for when it comes to traceability, transparency. So let's bring in Lucy, who's representing today the World Business Council for Sustainable Developments, and will be able to share the perspective from the buyer side. Hi,
Hey,
Lucy.
Pierre.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Not too bad. How are things in Switzerland?
Yeah, well, I won't comment on COVID, but
Okay,
in
let's
general,
not.
there's snow on the mountains, so that's good.
All right, excellent, super. So let's go right into it. So I mean, as the representative of buyers, I mean, what are you looking for in an effective guarantee of origin system when it comes to what we were talking about, transparency, granularity, etc.?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed Aurelie's first overview. I think a lot of the points that she's brought up are also very relevant for buyers. So I think just taking one step back for a second, we're very fortunate in Europe to actually have a strong basis of a geo framework. And this is really essential for companies consuming renewable electricity to be able to make credible and transparent claims for that electricity use. So we have a strong basis, and particularly when we're talking about the buyer's perspective, most companies that are claiming the use of renewable electricity with guarantees of origin today do so on an annual basis. So they report their annual use. So they submit a report once a year, and they're looking at total annual use of renewable electricity. So currently, the stipulations for the current geo system and the information that's provided on a typical guarantee of origin now are already reflecting that need at an annual level. However, we also do think that there is room for improvement, and so it's definitely around this granularity point that Aurelie has already mentioned. So over the past couple of years, we've seen growing interest around raising ambition from annual demand matching, as I just explained, to real-time demand matching. So some corporate buyers wanting to evidence that they consumed renewable electricity at the same time as it was being generated, so within that same 1 hour period. And if people are interested in reading into this a little more, Google announced last month their 24/7 carbon-free energy pledge, and they've released a white paper on how they're looking to achieve this as well. So I'd recommend having a look at that to learn a little bit more. But essentially the point here is that to be able to evidence this, we need to be able to increase granularity of timestamping on geos. So some member states have moved into this or are moving towards monthly timestamping, such as particularly examples in Spain and France. But indeed, to really answer that demand for real time, we need to move even more granular to hourly. And I think a very important point here to note as well is that we don't want to increase complexity or expense already associated with the geo system, but rather implement a very simple solution, which would be to add an hourly timestamp to the existing information that's already provided in Geos, so that those who are looking at real time can evidence that correctly, but that those who are continuing on the annual basis are also able to do so without any additional barriers cropping up. So yeah, I mean, we've got the review of RED 2 coming up, and that's definitely one of the asks that's going to be in there. There's also some new initiatives springing up to try and answer this demand. So Energy Tag is one that's going to be launched next month, which supports timestamping and hourly matching of energy attribute certificates. So not just in Europe with Geos, but with a global scope. So yeah, we're sure to see some development in this space soon.
Okay, so you're mentioning that various different countries have different approaches especially to the timestamp or the duration. I mean, where would you say national rules are actually holding back the development of corporate renewable sourcing? Rules that relate to guarantees of origin?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is relating to projects that are receiving support. Again, as Aurelie touched upon in the first segment. So in the text in RED 2, there's still that member states are able to decide what they do with the production of Geos to avoid any sort of double subsidies, for example. And so, yeah, that's something that needs to be tackled, as Aurelie was saying. So for certain member states, such as France and Germany, as two key examples, a corporate buyer signing a PPA with a subsidized project would therefore not receive the Geos to report on that claim for that particular project. So for that reason, we are seeing PPAs being signed in those countries more with existing projects that are no longer subsidized, so that those Geos can be bundled in. So it doesn't completely exclude the possibility, but there certainly are impacts that are being felt. So if you're only looking at unsubsidized projects, then you obviously have a smaller pool of available projects that you can sign a PPA with. There's also the impact on project economics, and also importantly, many companies are looking to ensure additionality through their renewable electricity procurement. So this could also come up as an issue for particular geographies.
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat basically asking, I mean, what type of PPA we are talking about here. So, I mean, there are several corporate renewable energy sourcing models, and we're using PPA as shorthands. So, but what do we mean? Are we talking about virtual PPAs, physical PPAs? Or are we just using a broad category that encompasses all of these?
Yeah, so in those particular messages, it counts for both. There are particular circumstances where I think it becomes more important for virtual PPAs. So that's the cross-border virtual PPA that we're seeing growing more at the moment. So lots more interest and also action on signing cross-border PPAs. And so, yeah, for anybody who doesn't understand that structure, it's basically where you're generating power in one market and consuming power in another. And so whenever you have that situation, you of course need to make sure that you have that credibility and transparency. So Geos become even more important in that case. And yeah, maybe a couple of points to add on that is that it's definitely essential to be following market rules on the cancellation of Geos in that case. So for example, some markets allow the cancellation of Geos in the market when it does not match their in-market load, which would be the case for a cross-border PPA. And another interesting point here is the link between market boundary criteria for reporting purposes and the Geo framework. So at the moment, if you sign a cross-border PPA with Europe, then you can report that, or you can make that environmental claim for the renewable electricity that's associated with that cross-border PPA to the relevant reporting bodies, such as RE100 and CDP. But in the future, so from January 2022, that is going to be changing slightly. So for companies reporting to CDP, they will only be able to make environmental claims for new cross-border PPAs, which have been signed within the markets that are members of the Association of Issuing Bodies, or AIB. So I think there's a lot of complexity within that. But the here is that the higher the traceability and transparency of the approach that the corporate buyer is choosing when they're looking at a cross-border virtual PPA, the more robust that renewable electricity procurement claim is. And maybe to add one more point, so WBCSD is drafting a paper on cross-border PPAs at the moment, and so we'll be launching that before the end of the year. That's in collaboration with Resource, so we'll have a discussion at Resource 2020 as well with experts working on cross-border PPAs into some of those complexities.
Maybe a quick question on the on cross-border PPAs. I mean, you said that you know there's increasing interest in it, but it looks like you know it comes with a great deal of complexity. So what is basically driving this interest in cross-border PPAs?
Yeah, so there are a few things. So it definitely depends on the company strategy. First point is, of course, project economics. So if you can sign a PPA with a project that has more favorable conditions in another country, then you have that economic argument or driver coming into play. Secondly, there are also many companies who have small demand loads across Europe, so they're able to then bundle those together essentially and then have an additional project because they can combine those loads into a single PPA. And another one, I mean, there are plenty of individual ones, but also leasing, or if you're maybe changing your corporate footprint over time. So say you sell one facility and you buy another, that offers more flexibility with the virtual cross-border PPA model.
All right, super. Well, looking forward to reading your reports on this coming up, and discussing it. Perhaps could be the object of a dedicated webinar, considering all the complexity and interest around this theme. Okay,
Sure.
I propose that we give a quick call to Adam White to round up the discussion. So Adam, who's director at REX International. Hey Adam, how are you?
Hi Pierre, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. You're calling from Brussels also, right?
Yeah, so like Aurelie, I'm enjoying the slightly less wet weather that we're having at the moment.
All right, fantastic. So we've talked a lot about the rules. We've talked about the motivation behind sourcing of guarantees of origin, but we haven't discussed market dynamics just yet. So this is what I propose to do to do now. I mean, I guess the elephant in the room is that we're in a long market, right? There's an oversupply of guarantees of origin, I mean, how would you recommend adjusting the system in order to basically drive demand for Geos?
Yeah, thanks. We think this is a really crucial point because obviously in a long market the prices fall, and that reduces the financial flows to renewables producers who can then reinvest in more renewables generation. So for us, there are two key elements to this. First is full disclosure, and then the second is recognizing the role of the demand side in energy markets. And so on the full disclosure, there are some good examples in Europe. We see the Netherlands, Austria, and Switzerland with full disclosure in different means, but it's really the practice of ensuring that all electricity or energy supply is certified. And the RED II allows for this. It doesn't require it, but it recognizes that it's something that member states are looking to do, and explicitly allows for it in Article 19 on guarantees of origin. And essentially it means that there's no more generic grey power. There's no more option just for buying electricity without a preference on where that electricity is coming from. And this means that consumers not only can make an active choice in favor of renewables, which they can do now, but they can also choose against other energy sources that they see in their bill if they want to. That could be coal or nuclear or anything else. And so we really think that full disclosure can help consumers make a really conscious and active choice about the energy they're consuming. And it's my belief that that will be largely to the interest of buying renewables. And so in maybe in conjunction or in parallel to full disclosure, and the other tool we see is very important is more recognition of the demand side support for renewables. So EU policies, as we know, have really focused on production and supply side policies that have pushed renewables into the market. And that's been super effective and very necessary at the beginning. But we all know we need to move further and faster. And we think Geos and consumer buying can really add an important lever of demand side support to the energy transition. And the EU could do more to maximize this consumer spending on renewables. There could be, for example, fiscal relief for people or corporations buying renewables, improving that with Geos. Or there could even be a mandate, as we see in the US with renewable energy portfolio standards. And that can really help maximize demand side support, which can accelerate the transition. And I want to say we don't at all criticize the supply side focus that we've seen so far. It has done great things. We just feel that, yeah, we can move further and faster if we pull all the levers that we have available to us.
Okay, very interesting. So that would be a radically different approach, right? I mean, portfolio standard obligations and things like that. I mean, would be completely changing the logic, I think, of EU regulation so far. I mean, is this something that you as REX International will be advocating as part of the upcoming process?
Yeah, so I think like the full disclosure is really like the logical conclusion of certification. So that's really working within the progress of the system we see so far. But yeah, a mandate on buying or supplying renewables would be a change in logic from really the kind of the supply side target approach to a more demand side target approach. But I think it wouldn't have to be a complete flip. They could work together. It wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world to do, but you could have, you know, demand side targets along with supply side targets. But I think that is just one option. Maybe it would be more interesting for politicians certainly to have kind of fiscal relief for people buying renewables, for example, as long as they can prove that, and that could stimulate the market just as much.
Okay. Clearly, I mean, one of the issues with fiscal measures is that you know, they're decided at a national level, right? I wanted to ask you, and so you know, it's very, very difficult to agree fiscal measures at EU level because that requires unanimity. Though of course, I mean, it would be extremely helpful for the energy transition. But that basically brings me to the point of, you know, national regulatory developments have you know, sometimes divergent and big impact on you know, the framework for guarantees of origin. I mean, can you discuss that, Adam?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important to recognize that the European Geosystem is kind of a mixture of bottom-up and top-down action, really. And so it all started with a small group of people back in early 2000, late 1990s, early 2000, who started to develop the scheme mainly in the Netherlands, and they split then into Regs International, which represents market participants, and the AIB, which is an umbrella organization representing system operators in each member state. And so they really kind of developed rules and practices that kind of kicked off the whole geo system in the EU. And then European and then national regulation has tended to follow this grassroots action. And we're really at a point now where the two are meeting in the middle, more or less, and that does create some challenges that need to be addressed. But we were happy to see that the 2018 RED II did support greater harmonization and standardization in geosystems. There, in previous iterations, there had been a lot of space left to member states, which is why we do see different rules in different countries, which can be challenging for corporate entities, particularly who work in across the EU. But it's a step in the right direction, and it's one that's really welcomed by market participants. But there is still some space left to member states, and we do, even after implementation of the RED II, which should be done by the middle of next year, we do expect to see some differences remaining between member states because of this leeway that's given in the RED II. And even though the RED II includes the requirement on member states to follow the European standard that's being revised on guarantees of origin, even those standards, they only apply insofar as they're not contradicted by national law. So that again is another step towards standardization, but one which has some limits. And as REX, we're a relatively small secretariat, so while we can't follow the implementation in each member state, if anyone on this call or our members or your members do have any concerns with how it's being implemented, we can certainly support taking them up both at EU level and with member state governments.
Okay, so speaking of regulatory developments, I think there's obviously a very important market which will be, you know, outside of the EU rulebook, and obviously that's the UK. So what would be the implications of Brexit here for Geos?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Brexit is a huge challenge for the EU and the UK in a lot of different areas, but particularly in Geos, because Article 19 included a new provision that the EU wouldn't recognise Geos or REGOs in the UK case from a third country, except if there's a mutual recognition between the two. And this has been tested in Switzerland, which has a fully developed Geo system, as I'm sure Lucy knows very well. They're a member of the AIB, so they're completely compliant with EU legislation and the AIB rules. They're part of the AIB market, But the Swiss-EU relationship has been based on a lot of different bilateral agreements. And so they had agreed an interinstitutional framework agreement that was negotiated and ratified on the EU side, but has not yet been ratified by Switzerland. And the EU's informal position, semi-formal position, is that until that is ratified, they're not going to discuss any specific product category, including Geos. So even though the Swiss system is fully recognized, they won't be able to export Swiss Geos into the EU. Now, Switzerland has been very pragmatic about this, and they've unilaterally accepted that they will continue to import EU single market Geos into Switzerland, even though they can't export. But if there's no clear Brexit deal, the UK would be in the same situation as Switzerland, with a kind of an unagreed trading relationship. And I don't know whether the UK government would be as pragmatic as the Swiss government has been and still allow the UK to import European Geos, even if they're not allowed to export UK REGOs. And that's significant because the UK currently has a net import of around 60 terawatt hours of EU Geos, and if that demand was lost to the market, that could exacerbate oversupply and be a real challenge to like we were talking about at the beginning, the long market that exists. So for this, many other reasons, including as a British person living in Brussels, I really hope that a close relationship can be maintained between the EU and the UK.
Okay, excellent. Thanks a lot for that, Adam. So we've got a bunch of questions coming in. One is for you, Lucy. So let me just read it out. So how does the 24/7 matchup really meet public demand of physical tracking? So current systems are not having any impact on the physical system, so it's hard to see how a higher geogranularity really helps. So on the one side, you've got a large corporate leading the way in terms of hourly matching, but how does that basically compute with the requirement for physical traceability?
Yeah, so, well, I'll have a go, and maybe if the person who submitted it doesn't feel like there's a full answer, maybe they can clarify with a little bit more sort of specific information. But yeah, I think the point about the increased granularity is basically saying that we have Geos already, we have a certain amount of information that's already listed on them. It would be a very quick fix to be able to add that hourly timestamp, and therefore for those who are interested in having that increased traceability for the real-time matching, would then be able to do so with relative ease. But I'm not sure about the point here on so what the disconnect here is on the physical claim. Maybe if you could just repeat that part.
I mean, I guess it's difficult. So I mean, if the question is what type of PPA is involved here, are we talking about physical PPAs with identifiable assets, which is what what seems to be the tendency from a lot of society, being able to have that visibility and traceability? Is it possible to combine that approach with the 24/7 objective?
Yeah, so I think it's not just one approach, so it's not just the physical PPA or the virtual PPA or unbundled Geos. It's a combination of these things together. So also for a virtual PPA, you would have an identified asset, and so you would be able to have the hourly timestamp for that virtual PPA, or same for the physical. And then if you're talking about any other consumption that you're not able to meet, then you still have the unbundled Geo market to be able to answer that. I think the wider question here is actually, so particularly like the Google white paper that's come out has already started addressing how this impacts the market. And so what we want to ensure is that when companies are looking at this real-time demand matching rather than annual demand matching, that they're actually seeing how that can create efficiencies in the market as a whole. So not actually, definitely not, this is a very important point to make, not over sort of over increasing supply so that you can then match your hourly demands, but indeed doing it in a way so that it has a system efficiency to it.
Okay. I've got a question from Claire Sandevoir here from Vattenfall, maybe for you, Adam. I mean, what is the we've discussed this, we've alluded to this already, but what is the time granularity applied to in different member states? So we said certain member states are going hourly already. Is that right?
Yeah, I think with these things, it's always important to differentiate between disclosure and reporting. So some member states are moving towards monthly disclosure periods. So the current kind of typical, as Lucy said, disclosure period is a year, either an annual, like a January to December, or a rolling 12-month disclosure period. And that's the period in which Geos can be used in a member state. But then there's the reporting, which corporates can do as they choose, more or less. And granularity on time is really more about reporting than it is about disclosure. And so for us, it's more about corporates who want to really try and match their consumption with the periods in which there's most renewables being generated and put into the grid. And obviously the geosystem as it exists kind of separates out the physical electricity system from the certificate market, because you can't always have generation and consumption matching up. And so you have to have this book and claim system. And if there's a lot of granularity on a certificate, which can be achieved through a timestamp, which denotes like even down to a 15-minute balancing period when the energy was created and put into the grid, then a consumer on the other end can look at those certificates, look at their own consumption, and buy certificates that match the hours or the 15-minute intervals when they were consuming. So they try and replicate as much as possible the physical market with the certificate market, but the two do remain separate.
Okay, we've got another question for you, Adam. So how do you foresee the position on Northern Irish Geos playing out in a post-Brexit scenario? Is there any possibility of divergence with the UK, given the existence of the single electricity markets in the island of Ireland? Okay, that's a very granular question. You may not be fully cited on that, but I don't know if you're able to share any insights of how you're at least looking at that problem.
I mean, I think as I mentioned before, the Brexit geo question is already pretty complicated and unclear, and it's only more so when you look at the Northern Irish situation, both with their relationship with the UK as a whole, but also the all-Ireland electricity market. So I wouldn't want to speculate too much on that. I'm very happy for anyone to contact me, and we can talk it through bilaterally. My email is a.white@rex.org. It's very easy. And that's probably the better means for doing that.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Adam. Aurelie, there's one question which, because you alluded to the to the intense discussions around the Renewable Energy Directive. There was one initial proposal from the European Commission. This is a question from Christine Topfer from Vattenfall. There was one initial proposal in the text of the Commission back in 2017, which was for the geos associated with projects that were subsidized or benefiting from a support mechanism, that these should be centrally auctioned. So as you said, that proposal was in the end not maintained in the text of the directive. But of course, it's not explicitly excluded either. So is there any risk, do you think, that certain member states will still implement the rules in that way and have the centralized auctioning of guarantees of origin?
Yes, so I mean, indeed, the answer is what you said. It's not explicitly mentioned. So the directive as such doesn't say auctioning of geos is forbidden. What it says is it's more taking it in a reverse way, where it says actually if the project is supported, you can issue a GEO as a member state. You're allowed to do it. And it also lays out various ways to avoid what was actually the biggest problem back in the time when it comes to issuing GEOs to supported project. The biggest problem was the so-called double compensation. So you get the money from the GEO, you get the money from the support scheme. And in fact, we had to communicate a lot on the fact that this overcompensation is very unlikely to happen as soon as you're in a system where, for example, the installation is being tendered. And so in most cases, you actually factor in the benefit that you receive from the GEO, which is very minimal, into defining the most competitive bid. So to answer the question, indeed, as it stands in the text, as a member state, you can indeed auction the GEOs, and that remains a problem which probably, looking ahead of the RED 2 review, we would try to solve, and we would probably try to have a more explicit acknowledgement that auctioning GEOs that are linked to supported project is really not the good way to go.
Okay, perhaps a question back to you, Adam. I mean, we're talking about guarantees of origin here, but the question from the viewer is: are we referring to voluntary renewable energy consumption claim, or to GEOs that are basically transferred with the national statistics, national renewable energy statistics?
Yeah, so the geo system in Europe is completely voluntary. So no one is required to buy geos to prove their consumption of renewables. It's completely up to consumer choice. What happens, and this comes back to a bit the issuance for supported schemes or not, this is particularly an issue in Germany because, so for understandable reasons, the German government see the production of renewable energy as a kind of a social good that's paid for by everybody, and therefore everyone should benefit. So they don't issue GEOs to supported production, which is the vast majority of the German renewables production, and therefore everybody receives the residual mix, which is the grid mix of energy after GEOs have been cancelled on behalf of individual consumers. And so that's kind of the case where everyone in Germany pays for renewables through their bills and everyone receives renewables. What happens in other countries is that if, for example, in France, the state does issue GEOs to supported generation, but the state retains those GEOs themselves and auctions them for sale. And as already mentioned, that can a bit remove the link between the producer and the consumer, and that creates some challenge. But in France, in the auctions, you can specify down to the production device which GEOs you're bidding on. It's not guaranteed that you receive them, of course. So that's the way that the French government is fulfilling this requirement in RED 2 of taking into account the value of the GEO in the support scheme. Other governments have looked to try and do that administratively, for example, to set like a benchmark price for GEOs, take that off the support scheme that they provide. Particularly if it's an administratively set support scheme, so a fixed rate, and therefore expect the producer to sell the GEOs to make up the difference. But all of this is really predicated on administratively set support schemes, as I said, like feed-in tariffs, where support schemes are auctioned, which is increasingly the case, especially for large developments. Then those developers bidding in will already be taking into account their assessment of what they think they can receive for the GEOs and reducing their bids accordingly. And so that means that the public support, and that's why you sometimes see zero bid auctions, and that means that public support is really then can be targeted to those schemes that particularly need it, either because of the technology or because of the location, that really need some public support. Otherwise, the market through the electricity price and the GEO price can really cover all of the costs of generation.
Okay, excellent. And we're getting a lot of questions also that go a little bit beyond electricity, right? I mean, I think as you know, we move to decarbonize the energy system as a whole. Obviously, electricity is only part of the energy system. It's going to be, you know, at least 50%, but there will always be in 2050, but there will always be a bit of a bit of the system that's harder to abate, and where we will be using things like renewable hydrogen, etc. So perhaps a question to all of you. I mean, how do you see the Geo system evolving in order to reflect the need to have also traceability and transparency also outside of electricity? Do you want to give that one a start, Aurelie?
Yeah, with pleasure. Thanks, Pierre. So, I mean, not surprising indeed that there are so much questions on that, because that is obviously one of the biggest challenge which we see that we will have to tackle, speaking about the Geos in the next years. So, I mean, since we have at European level initiated this reflection about energy system integration, about sector coupling, and since we have been for a year now really discussing the potential contribution of renewable hydrogen, so hydrogen produced through renewable electricity and through electrolysis to the overall transition, we clearly see this question arising, because we know now that hydrogen will have a role to play to decarbonize how to abate sectors, and so also industrial and corporate users, so notably looking at heavy industries and electro-intensive industries. And so we know that at some point, while electricity is no longer the sole focus when we're trying to increase the contribution of renewables, we're looking at various energy carriers, and we need to think of having a common currency to actually, for each carrier, being able to assess the renewable part of it, and how to make sure that, notably talking about hydrogen, we are really able to trace hydrogen produced with renewable electricity compared to others. So I think at this point in time, what we can, or what I can do, is more, drawing pathways rather than answering questions. But it's clear that from the renewable perspective, having a clear, transparent, robust certification system for notably hydrogen is going to be essential. It would be a bit foolish to have two various currencies, one for hydrogen and one for electricity, living together in the same market. So at some point we need to look at the same Geos. And in fact, the standard, so there is a standard with a lot of numbers in the red too. Maybe Adam knows the standard, the SEN, I don't know what are the numbers after this, but it's the same standard actually that we are working on at the moment when it comes to electricity or hydrogen. So I think this trend is already ongoing. But yeah, I think that there might be some challenges associated to that, and I don't know if my colleagues have a more clear view for this.
An immediate follow-up question that I see in the chat here. Do you think it will continue to be acceptable for electrolyzers to buy gray electricity but green it with Geos? Will this be prevented in the revision of RED 3? So, I mean, what do we think?
We do our best to prevent that. I guess in general, we do want to see at European level for the hydrogen strategy, we want to see a very clear commitment that we're going to talk about hydrogen produced with renewable electricity. And so we want to make sure that the hydrogen strategy comes with the notion of additionality, because we still have so much to do to deploy renewables and really fully decarbonize the electricity side of the energy system. I mean, if we want targets for renewable hydrogen, we will need much more renewables. So we need to find a way which clearly incentivizes the owners of electrolyzers capacity or producers of hydrogen. They need to be clearly incentivized to use, for example, additional renewable electricity, and not necessarily have a greenwashing approach, just using from the grid and combining with Geos coming from I don't know where. So it's not clear yet, but the discussion is clearly open. And in the revision of the RED II, it's very clear that hydrogen will be included. So that will be included in the discussion for the target, for example. When we're discussing the 2030 target for renewables, are we only talking about electricity now, or are we factoring in the target discussion the additional capacity that we want to see for hydrogen? And many stakeholders start to call for that. And for the Geos as well, it's clear that the discussion on the standards will be expanded to hydrogen, and that it will be another interesting battlefield.
Got another follow-up question, perhaps for you, Adam. So, do you also believe that Geos should be issued when converting electricity or gaseous fuels into liquid fuels? And if yes, who should be the issuing body?
So yeah, this is obviously it's a pleasingly well-informed audience that we have, and this is getting into the details.
Yes.
And I would largely agree with Aurelie's point that the point of developing more hydrogen is to use excess production of renewables when it's available, and that can really maximize all the technologies that we have and support the energy transition. I would say though that there's not really a process of buying grey electricity, right? So this is why it goes to the fundamentals of why we have a book and claim system for guarantees of origin, that you can't trace the physical flow of electricity from one producer to one consumer. It's just electricity is put on the grid is kept in balance, off-takers take it off the grid. And so there's no kind of physical flow. And that's why we have to have a book and claim certificate system for any consumer to say, this is what I'm consuming. They have to cancel the Geo, which given the level of questions, I'm sure everyone is fully aware of, but just to be super clear about. And so when electricity or other energy sources go through a conversion process and come up with another energy source at the other end, there is a process that needs to happen with that. And as already said, that is happening. That's being developed and discussed in the European standard, which for my sins, I know is the SEN 16325 standard. We've gone through one revision round now. There'll be another revision round for those people participating in it in November, and then it goes to the national committees. And the national committees have to all agree to the standard. And so it's not a given what the process is going to be. It's not obvious how to manage this conversion of different energy sources. It's still open. The aim is to have the standard set in place by the end of the RED II implementation period, which is the end of July 2021. That's a challenging timescale, particularly if any of the national committees have an issue with what the kind of the expert proposal for the revised standard is. But really the driving motivation of revising the standard is to include other energy carriers, because the RED II extended the use of guarantees of origin from renewable electricity to all renewable energy and heating and cooling. So it's really the driving force behind making sure that the whole energy system is well coordinated when it comes to the use of Geos. And the most important thing is that it's understandable for consumers, and they see it as being reliable and trustworthy, because that's the way you get people confident enough to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe I can just echo that point as well. So from the consumer perspective, so I believe it's recital 59, if anybody wants to look in more detail about the suggestion of extending Geos to cover renewable gas as well as electricity, such as biomethane and hydrogen. And I think in particular, because of the production of green hydrogen, and its consumption will most likely be unbundled in order to optimize transportation, distribution. It's so important, as Adam says, that we have a very robust system for guarantees of origin for green hydrogen. And I'm very glad that many people are working on this, but it really remains to be seen how it's going to be implemented in practice. And maybe one call out for further information if people want to have a look. I know that the European project Certify has been looking at this, so that's Certify with HY at the end. So designing a European framework for green hydrogen. And I believe they're also presenting their results at Resource 2020 again. So opportunity to continue the conversation there.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. That was brilliant. You almost did my job, Lucy, wrapping up the session. So thanks a lot for that. No, so there are more questions in the chat here, clearly suggesting that that this discussion needs to continue. What I draw from this is that clearly, I mean, considering the commitment to climate neutrality and the necessary expansion of a traceability mechanism to renewable hydrogen, there's going to be an appetite, there's going to be a push to have a joined up mechanism that is fit for purpose, that's actionable, and that's basically harmonized, more harmonized than is the case today. Yeah, so so that gives us a lot of homework as part of the of the review, but I think it's definitely a step in the right direction for the energy transition. So I propose to leave it there. We have a record of all the questions in the chat, so we'll do our best to come back to you on those. But with that, I just wanted to give a plug to the resource newsletter. Do register for that if you're interested in these types of discussions and webinars. And of course, as Lucy said, I really encourage you to join us at Resource 2020. You know, this has been a physical event in past years, very successful. Of course, we're taking it, considering the situation at the moment, we're taking it online, and it's actually going to be a week-long event with inspirational talks, with B2B matchmaking, with opportunities to learn and share experiences as we've been doing this morning. And there will be these kind of wonky discussions for the more experienced of you, but also content for those who are newer to the corporate renewable energy procurement space. So our respective teams very much look forward to seeing you there virtually. And with that, thank you very much, Adam. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Aurelie, for your commitment and for your time and for your insights. And thank you very much to all of you for having followed this discussion this morning. Have a great day and take care.
Thanks, Pierre. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Pierre.
Thanks very much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.